Hello, and welcome to Connected with Latham, where we discuss ideas, legal developments, and business trends shaping the global economy. I'm Nathan Ajiashvili, a corporate partner in Latham's New York office and co-chair of our New York corporate department. In this episode, we'll discuss the confirmation of the new Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and a look ahead to what we may see in 2022 across the healthcare industry. Joining me for this discussion are members of our healthcare and life science practice in Washington, D.C., partner and global chair John Manthei, partner Ben Haas, and associate Nathan Beaton. They focus their practice on regulatory matters involving the FDA for the medical device, pharmaceutical, tobacco, and biotechnology industries. Welcome, John, Ben, and Nathan.
Thanks, Nate.
Great to be here today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, let's get started. John, why are we here today?
Well, after over a year, the U.S. Senate confirmed Dr. Robert Califf as the 25th Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Califf will reclaim the role, having previously served as the 22nd FDA Commissioner the last year of the Obama administration. Califf will take over for Dr. Janet Woodcock, who's been acting FDA Commissioner since Biden was sworn in as president, who's also an over 40-year veteran of FDA. She was also one of the leaders of President Trump's Operation Warp Speed and was actually a very popular choice of the life sciences industry to get the job permanently. Califf's confirmation as President Biden's first permanent FDA Commissioner rings in the start of what promises to be a busy and I think pivotal year for the agency, Congress, and the life sciences industry.
Thanks, John. Nate Beaton, turning to you now. What do we know about Dr. Califf's background and his prior experience at the agency? What can you tell us about his expertise?
Sure. He'll, of course, bring his experience at FDA in the commissioner's role back to a second stint at the agency, but he also has years of experience as a clinician and academic. Before his first stint at FDA, Califf had spent most of his career as a practicing cardiologist and professor of medicine at Duke University. He graduated from Duke School of Medicine and then returned to Duke, where he spent most of his professional life. He was a member of the medical school faculty and has served in several high-profile leadership roles at the university. He was the director of the Duke Clinical Research Institute, vice chancellor for clinical and translational research, and director of the Duke Translational Medicine Institute. He's been recognized as a leader in cardiovascular medicine and clinical and health outcomes and quality research, and has led major initiatives aimed at improving the methods and infrastructure for clinical research, including the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, or CTTI, a public-private partnership launched by Duke and FDA in 2007. Today, that organization consists of over 500 organizations across the clinical trials ecosystem and is focused on modernizing clinical trials, including, for example, recommendations with respect to the integration of digital health technologies, things like wearables or other remote monitoring tools, into clinical trial designs. Califf first left Duke in February 2015 to serve in the Obama administration as Deputy Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco at FDA. In that role, he was responsible for providing executive leadership to each of the agency's drugs, biologics, device, and tobacco product centers. He then went on to serve as the commissioner for the final year of the Obama administration, and that time overlapped with the negotiation and passage of the 21st Century Cures Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation intended to accelerate medical product development through a number of reforms. And it also overlapped with user fee commitment letter negotiations, which were ultimately finalized after his time at FDA. While leading FDA, Califf notably launched a review of the agency's approach to opioid medications, but as commissioner and consistent with his background, he was probably best known as an advocate for the expanded use of real-world evidence and flexible clinical trial designs to support regulatory decision-making. After his stint as commissioner, Califf returned to Duke and continued his focus on the organization, development, and use of patient outcomes data, electronic health records, and other real-world evidence. He served as Vice Chancellor for Health Data Science and Director of Duke Forge, a center for health data science designed to facilitate the use of clinical data to enable actionable insights across Duke's health systems. And he also helped to develop the Duke Artificial Intelligence for Health initiative. He also served as an advisor to Alphabet, Google's parent company, and in 2019 joined Alphabet as head of medical strategy and policy, where he had responsibility across Google Health and Verily Life Sciences. He'll be leaving Alphabet to return to FDA as commissioner.
Nate, thank you so much for that. Obviously, Dr. Califf is very experienced and qualified for this job. Ben, turning over to you, if we can shift to the confirmation hearing and vote, what were the key takeaways from that hearing and vote?
Well, first, it was much closer than anticipated. When he was first confirmed under the Obama administration, it was an 89-4 vote. And as we saw, this vote was much tighter. And there are a few reasons for that. First, as Nate indicated, he's seen as friendly to industry, and is a very comfortable pick for the biotech industry. His leadership roles, his experience with big data, and other initiatives intended to facilitate the more rapid development of new drugs and devices is certainly something that is seen favorably by industry and is something that is expected to yield fruit in terms of more rapid pathways to market. And that was a key focus of Dr. Califf's testimony when he spoke to the committee in December. But this perceived friendliness to industry has also led to criticism, particularly from Democrats, regarding these historical ties and what are perceived to be failures in combating the opioid epidemic, both under Obama and moving forward. And he's not seen as the guy to sort of rein in the industry in that regard. On the other hand, he also faced significant dissent from a handful of Republicans based on abortion politics. The so-called abortion pill, which traditionally had been subject to a REMS program, which is a restricted distribution program that required this so-called abortion pill to only be dispensed under the supervision of a physician in a clinic or a hospital. During the COVID pandemic and in response to litigation, FDA began to permit those drugs to be directly mailed to patients. And he received intense questioning at the hearing in December regarding FDA's ongoing effort to facilitate access to that drug. And subsequently, FDA made that decision permanent. So now this drug can be provided to patients directly via mail. This led to pro-life groups coming out in opposition to Califf's nomination, based on a presumption that he has a track record of, in their words, rubber stamping demands from the abortion industry. So the political overlay led to some concern that there'd be Republican defections to the extent that it may impact the nomination. But obviously he got through. Another key takeaway from the hearing and the vote is the focus on drug pricing. Historically, Dr. Califf had indicated or urged CMS to begin negotiating drug pricing with industry. Obviously, FDA is a different agency, and during the hearing, he received questions as to FDA's ability to help manage the drug pricing issue, whether that be through promoting generic drug approvals, providing access to different medications sort of on an accelerated basis, et cetera. But Califf, I think, consistent with past FDA commissioners, has acknowledged that drug pricing is essentially outside of FDA's authority. Certainly, they do possess tools to help provide greater access to drugs, but at the end of the day, they do not directly control pricing. So it'll be interesting to see how the big data initiatives and other mechanisms that remain underway at FDA to accelerate new drugs and generics to the market will manifest itself as he takes the commissionership. So finally, synthetic nicotine. FDA has jurisdiction over tobacco products. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the controversy over use of e-cigarettes and other technologies. FDA has certainly made efforts to crack down on that industry, particularly as it relates to marketing to youth. But over the past year or so, we've seen an explosion in the introduction of so-called synthetic nicotine products, which to date, FDA has said are outside of its jurisdictional authority because nicotine, to the extent it's synthetic, is not derived from the tobacco plant, which is a predicate for FDA's assertion of jurisdiction. So one of the key questions for FDA to confront in the tobacco space in 2022 is what, if anything, it'll do about these synthetic nicotine products, which are in many cases marketed much like Juul and Puff Bar, the products that led to this youth explosion. Well, Califf, consistent with FDA's current policy, has said this is a statutory loophole that must be addressed by Congress, and that FDA currently lacks the authority to regulate these products, which will not be a welcome statement to public health communities, but also sort of kicks the can back to Congress to address that issue as we move forward. So, with respect to tobacco, we don't see any changes forthcoming in that space. But Nate, generally, those are the key takeaways, specifically the closeness of the vote, which may be a manifestation of our current political environment. But it'll be interesting to see if, these competing issues impact his role as commissioner once he takes the chair.
Very, very interesting, Ben. Thank you so much. All right, let's have some fun here. Let's go to put our prediction hats on. And John, I'd love to start with you. What is your thinking on FDA's key priorities and what we may see in 22 across the regulated industry?
Well, I think Califf's testimony during the confirmation process gives us a good window into what we can expect his administrative priorities to be, I think there's generally three buckets. First, I would say, emergency preparedness and response, both in connection with the current COVID-19 pandemic, but also future pandemics. Secondly, I would say modernizing the FDA regulatory decision process, really to keep pace with all the technological developments that have occurred within industry. And then third, he's mentioned ensuring the safety of FDA-regulated products in the marketplace. As I think both Nate and Ben had mentioned, in each case, the potential for the use of real-world evidence and real-world data to facilitate these priorities was a repeated theme in his remarks. In particular, Califf emphasizes belief that there is currently no technological limitation to accessing large sets of patient outcomes data, but that work still needs to be done, in his words, quote, to get the rules in place for their use. This has been a major limitation on actually taking data analytics and large data sets and actually making them usable for regulatory purposes. So I was glad to hear him make those comments, and also really hopeful that that will be a top priority and that we'll actually make some real progress on using real world data for the life sciences industry. With respect to his priorities regarding pandemic response and planning for the next pandemic, during his testimony, Califf offered really few specifics. I do think there's probably a number of areas that we can watch, though, in the coming year in light of the intense focus on the agency and its COVID-19 response. I think including the use of the agency's inspectional authorities or alternatives. I think another area to watch would be the approach to laboratory-developed diagnostic tests. And then finally, how to deal with drug and device shortages, including supply chain issues. One example that I'm going to be watching closely is, FDA has recently leaned on alternative authorities in light of its inability to conduct on-site inspections because of COVID, most notably foreign inspections, including the use of virtual inspections, remote regulatory assessments. It'll be interesting to see whether the agency will continue to rely on some of those authorities, which, historically, it has been seldomly used by FDA. Perhaps the most significant thing, I think, for industry to watch this upcoming year is going to be Califf's role in the reauthorization of the major user fee programs. That includes the user fee programs for drugs, biologics, generics, and medical devices. These programs are now a significant source of funding for FDA operations, and all of these programs sunset this year. They're one of the rare, legislative must-dos. And historically, when they've been reauthorized, they've been the driver for additional major FDA legislative reforms. I think areas to watch are all the themes mentioned by Califf during his testimony, modernizing the FDA regulatory process and how FDA actually regulates laboratory-based tests. I think it will be at the forefront of that debate. One area I'm going to be watching closely administratively is one area that Ben mentioned, was can they use the FDA regulatory scheme to control drug prices? That includes whether it intends to focus on speeding the review of generics and follow-on products, and if the agency becomes tighter on awarding market exclusivity protections. And then finally, it's going to be interesting to watch how he organizes the FDA Commissioner's Office, including key appointments for deputy commissioners, chief counsel, and the Office of Regulatory Affairs, which impacts post-market enforcement, which notably has fallen off over the last handful of years. It's going to be really busy. It's going to be an important year for the agency and industry. It's going to be fun to watch.
Thanks, John. Ben, anything to add to John's remarks?
I think John provided a very nice overview. One other thing that we're thinking about is Biden's industrial policy writ large. One of the lessons learned of the pandemic and the extensive shortages we saw of key drugs and medical products during the early stages of the pandemic. It's a key priority for the Biden administration to onshore manufacturing. It'll be interesting to see how that policy translates into FDA initiatives, whether that be more favorable treatment for domestic manufacturers or manufacturers of our key partners in Europe, or more scrutiny to supply chains originating in China and India. So that'll be another thing to track over the next 4 years. But Nate, for you, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, being a capital markets attorney in New York, what the outlook is for the investment community and deals in the biotech sector.
Thanks, Ben. We were hopeful, the markets and the biotech sector, in particular, would be a bit more active and risk on. Unfortunately, what we've seen is more of the same of what has occurred or what did occur in second half of 21. We have an IPO asset class from 21 and some parts of 20 that are underperforming. We have an XBI, the main biotech index, market professionals look to, are well below its all-time highs. So we have, and also macro events, that are not biotech specific or company specific in the biotech community that are weighing, further, negative impact on the biotech investment community. So I think generally it's a cautious and even negative outlook as we stand here right now, but the pipeline is quite robust. I think there's hope that, with catalysts being either M&A driven, we've seen some good partnerships with large pharma be announced. And hopefully as the macro environment cools off and stabilizes a bit, we'll have the biotech investment community be risk on again. And we'll see more of the generalists look to this asset class for growth in 2022. We've had a lot of transactions here, and I'm sure others are experiencing too, just waiting on the sidelines, waiting for the right time to hit the market. So I think we're going to have a slow Q1 in the investment community, including in the crossover community. But the hope being as we get into Q2, as we look into the summer months, and again, the biotech companies need capital. They are a capital-intensive industry, and so we need to seek the market to raise the capital to develop our drugs. I think there is hope given the quality of the companies that are on the sidelines and the quality of companies that have upcoming catalysts, whether it's data-driven or otherwise. I think we're hopeful that, as we enter into Q2 and mid of this year, we'll see a much more positive market outlook.
Nate, what do you think the investment community is watching for with the new FDA commissioner? Is there anything that they're in particular looking for or hoping for out of this administration and the new commissioner?
Look, John, I think it's hard to say anything specific. I haven't heard anything in our discussions, whether it's at the board level or with investors or bankers in the community, that they're specifically looking to this agency and this commissioner. But what I would say is that the market is essentially or broadly risk off, and it's a wait and see approach here in the broader IPO asset class, the crossover class, and the primary issuance for biotech companies. I think what the FDA and what DC can provide is a potential catalyst to change momentum in the markets for biotech companies, whether it's looking at getting drugs approved quicker, getting out and doing the inspections for manufacturing facilities so drugs can get through the NDA process. Whether it's anything that is data driven or clinical trial driven from a catalyst perspective, that can only help, I think, the broader biotech community and the broader biotech asset class, and spark potentially more investment execution as we proceed with the calendar year 2022. Hopefully, it is a positive for the broader community, Dr. Calliff's appointment and confirmation, but it's hard to say if there's anything specific that the community is looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I think we're all hopeful that the FDA regulatory process, both on a pre and post-market basis, is going to not only modernize, make it more efficient, make it less expensive, and enable all of us to be able to move products through the regulatory scheme quicker and more efficiently.
Well, this has been a great overview about Dr. Calliff's appointment, an extremely helpful insight about potential FDA key priorities in 2022. Thanks again, John, to you, Ben, and Nathan for being our guests today.
Nate, it was my pleasure to join today.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. Happy to join the discussion.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our listeners for checking out this episode in our Connected with Latham series. You can subscribe and listen to new and archived episodes of Latham's podcasts on lw.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. If you'd like more information about the topics in this podcast, please email us using the links located in the show description. We hope you'll join us again next time.
This podcast is provided as a service of Latham & Watkins, LLP. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and Latham & Watkins, LLP, and you should not send confidential information to Latham & Watkins, LLP. While we make every effort to assure that the content of this podcast is accurate, comprehensive, and current, we do not warrant or guarantee any of those things. And you may not rely on this podcast as a substitute for legal research and/or consulting a qualified attorney. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for engaging a lawyer to advise you on your individual needs. Should you require legal advice on the issues covered in this podcast, please consult a qualified attorney. Under New York's Code of Professional Responsibility, portions of this communication contain attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each representation. Please direct all inquiries regarding the conduct of Latham & Watkins attorneys under the New York's disciplinary rules to Latham & Watkins, LLP, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York 10020. Phone number 1-212-906-1200.